Thank you, Saurabh, and welcome to everybody. Thank you all very much for coming. So democracy is noisy, it's slow, and it's often frustrating. Yet it has proved remarkably hard to extinguish. Around the world, it is under strain, especially in places that once believed it was settled. India, by contrast, keeps voting, keeps arguing, and does keep the system moving in its own way. However, imperfectly. So today is not a post-mortem on Indian democracy. It's about democracy as a global idea, why it works at all, why it disappoints, why it takes deeper root in some places rather than in others. And I'm so pleased to be joined by this distinguished panel to talk about this. So if we could start with Ashwani. In Guardians of the Republic, you write about restraint. And I wonder if fragility is built into democracy itself.
There are two questions. Can you hear me?
You know what, you guys might need to swap mics, it's the other way around. We could take a vote, I suppose, and make this truly democratic about who gets to speak next. I'm sure we'll find a working microphone in a moment. 4 of the brightest minds in India, and we can't make it work. There we go. Ashwani, I'll just repeat that. I'm wondering if fragility is built into democracy.
Well, fragility is built into any structure of government, into any political system, one way or the other, but certainly there are fragilities built into our democratic systems, particularly in constitutional democracies, and that is what we are really discussing today. And I think the most difficult part of democracy is that it tends to achieve in ground realities, in real life, the purpose and the objectives that it seeks to avoid, namely concentration of power. Electoral democracies tend to yield verdicts that lead to majoritarianism, that lead to concentration of power, and that kind of power is often in an antagonistic relationship with both principle and justice. And the perennial challenge of all scholars of democracy has been to unravel this mystery. You cannot discount the role of majorities in democracy because that is how you enlist popular will. That is how you are supposed to enlist the willing allegiance of the people to power. And yet, it sometimes, as recent events have shown across the world, yielded a contrary result. So that is the fragility that I am most concerned about. And people feel that the institutions of libertarian democracies, institutions of constitutional democracies, are the effective guardrails against that situation. I beg to differ. The institutions of democracy are as much amenable to the same pressures that plague democracy in its other manifestations. They are the same people reflecting the sensitivities of the same social order who man these institutions. And therefore somebody has said the choice is between institutional stability and moral retreat. You will see very often that those who are supposed to be voices of sanity, those who are supposed to be taming the exercise of untrammeled power, fail to do so. Why? Precisely because they consider themselves as part of the institutional mechanisms of the state from which they are not different. Take the case of the Indian Supreme Court. It has had a stellar record in the progressive evolution of human rights. It has had a stellar record as far as some of its path-breaking judgments are concerned. But when it comes to enforcing its own edicts, it fails all the time. And therefore, to rest our hopes in the institutions of democracy which the Constitution creates is another fragile point in the study of democracies.
Badri, if I could come to you and talk about when restraint weakens, what changes first in the way, in how politics is practiced on the ground?
Yeah, actually, it's a wonderful point of discussion. You know, politics plays a very important role in disseminating democracy at the grassroots level. Politics is in that way is one of the kind of agency which take democracy to the grassroots. But you know, there can't be the methodological problem here is there a global form of democracy? I think no. There are multiple forms of democracy located in various culture, various society, and they have their own way of disseminating or practicing democracy in their society. So there are two forms to understand democracy. One is the values, democratic values, which are coming from the top, from a educated class, from a politics which claim to be a democratic politics. On the other hand, public at the grassroots, they have their own way of understanding democracy, living with the democracy. You know, we have done field work in various parts of India and other South Asian countries also. In most of the villages and the kasbas, people don't know this word democracy. They know ijat, they know barabari, they know they have their own diction to understand democracy and they live with the democracy. So my first proposition is there can't be a global form narrative of democracy, global form of democracy. Democracy has different forms, different versions based on their own local cultures and local history of the society. The success or unsuccess of democracy also lies in that. Because why people say that India is the largest democracy? You see, here is India, other part of South Asia, you can see Pakistan, you can see Sri Lanka, there are many countries around. And you see how democracy is developing in those countries and how it is happening in India. Because in India, it has a root. You know, Ganatantra, Likshmi Ganatantra, you know, the Kalinga, you know, the Magad Samraj and all. They had their own way of, we have an interesting book on that is Hindu Polity written by K.P. Jaiswal. And in that he describes how Raja used to be selected by discourses. If someone perform well, that person will be selected. So in India, there is a root of memories. You can call memory also play important role in the success and unsuccess of the democracy. So in that way, so politics which is emerging in society, and we say that politics is disseminating democracy in the grassroots, I think this is the half a story. Half a story is to understand the public life, their own life universe, own culture, own memory, how they behave with the democracy. Third thing is, any democracy can't create a complete, perfect equality in society. You have seen that in every society there are equal and unequal systems, like suburbs in the West, like refugees in the West, like they are struggling for acquiring full citizenship. Full citizenship not in terms of in technical term, in a real sense. And in various society you can find this kind of, so democracy is not a only alternative to reply to bring the equality in society, but it is the alternative, because it has no other alternative to the world, to the humanity, to live or create a life universe. So that's the thing. So politics in that way is very important. It's emancipatory. It takes democracy to the grassroots, but it has their own diction of democracy. And when people, when they interact with the public, sometimes public don't understand their language, their diction. Public has their own diction. So politics also need to transform itself, evolve their own language, own diction, which can be appropriated by the public. So democratic language, which is coming on the top, from the top, should be overhaul itself and link itself with the common language and diction of the public of various societies.
So I'd like to just explore a little bit about what you said about inequality, because Manu, you've written Why the Poor Don't Kill Us, and in that you show why inequality doesn't lead to revolt. Why?
Well, in the book, I've given several reasons why the poor don't kill us, why there is no revolution in one of the most unequal regions of the earth. But I'll give one now, because the moderator, Georgina, is from Zimbabwe. I have a Zimbabwe story. I covered the Cricket World Cup, which was hosted by South Africa and Zimbabwe and Kenya. And I was 28 years old. I was with Outlook, and I stayed in Harare with a white couple. They were farmers, they were landowners. And that was the time when Robert Mugabe was trying to drive them away from Zimbabwe, and they were yet to, he was yet to drive them away. And I was staying with them, and they had two black housemaids who are now called house help, or whatever the politically correct term is. So we were staying with them, and we were having breakfast, and the hostess was telling us that everybody hates Robert Mugabe because he's such a villain. I mean, he was the villain of that time. Even the blacks in Zimbabwe hate him. Now, I was 28. I didn't know anything about African politics. Actually, I didn't know much about Indian politics also at that time. But my third world brain told me that that can't be true, because when the rich of a society has a very strong opinion about someone, usually the poor have the exact opposite opinion of that. And so I told my hostess, it was very sad because they were having a beautiful morning. They were having a great relationship, the house help and the owners. But I told them that I don't think your house help feels so strongly about Robert Mugabe. And the hostess was very, very shocked. Said that is simply not possible. You know, he's such a horrible man. And so unfortunately, they decided to ask the house help. They were initially very smart. They just giggled, they didn't answer. But then one of them said, no, Mugabe is for us. We like him. And my hosts were shocked because they were such decent people. They're not like Indians. They pay them very well. They give them good clothes. But yet, they had a very different view from the owners. So I feel that in the heart of all this that we are trying to discuss is class. And generally, between the rich and their thuggish politicians, the poor prefer the politicians to the rich. The poor like money, but they don't like class. Class is what they don't aspire to. In fact, one of the things that's going on in the world today, why intellectuals have lost their influence, is that generally people are so annoyed with intellectuals that even when intellectuals make sense, people hate sense itself. So we need to find a new way of talking, which is not lecturing and which is not being sanctimonious, because most people have moderate opinion, but they develop views that are the exact opposite of people they hate. And that is the driving force of politics, I feel.
I mean, Ruhi, that there is obviously a class divide, but there's also a gender divide, and that's what you've written about. And you've said that women vote in a more sort of calculating way. Can you just unpack that for us?
Sure. Thank you, Georgina. So I'll try and answer that question in the form of 3 points, and each of them will lead to the next point. Number one, women nowhere are a monolith, right? Not in India, not anywhere in the world. It's a very, very heterogeneous group. There are various identities that compete with each other that women grapple with on an everyday basis, much like men. So it's not a homogeneous monolith. However, having said that, which brings me to my second point, there is one thing common among women across the world, in vast parts of the world rather. In every identity, they are second to men, right? They have always been conditioned to be that. Unfortunately, our societies, more so in India, but in various parts of the world, in various parts of South Asia as well, are traditionally so male-dominated and so patriarchal that women have always been kept on the fringes, have always been kept on the margins. And that is one common vulnerability that women across a cross-section face. What has that meant? That has meant that women in the West, for instance, in several countries, the right to vote wasn't absolute for women, right? You had to fight for it. In India, even if we had the right to vote, women weren't encouraged to vote independently. They didn't have the agency to vote independently. So because of these things, they've been on the fringes of politics, on the fringes of society. Look at the political representation of women. It's so unfortunate and so poor even today. So even if they're not a monolith, there is one common quality, and that's the fact that their gender has been a disadvantage for them at a large scale across the world. And that brings me to my third point. It's because their gender has been such a disadvantage and they've faced so many vulnerabilities, they've always been kept on the fringes and on the margins. Women are increasingly voting, keeping their gender at the forefront. Now, these are not absolutes. These are just, you work more on averages. But women are increasingly voting as women. They're keeping what would benefit them as women at the forefront. And that brings me to your question, Georgina, which is why they are more rational as voters, right? It's because, I don't want to sound, I don't want to sound facetious, but men have the luxury of not being very rational, right? Especially in a society like India, because they have always been given their due, or more than their due. Women, unfortunately, don't have that luxury, which is why women now, when they are increasingly voting, their vote is mattering, their vote is becoming important, they are increasingly looking at day-to-day, how their day-to-day lives can become better. They are being more pragmatic about their voting decisions, because at the end of the day, they have been deprived of so much that it's important for them to keep that in mind. So they are not as swayed by esoteric issues as maybe perhaps the male voter is, and women hence and therefore are far more rational, I would say transactional as voters even, which I mean in the best possible way. I think every voter should be transactional. It's an instrument of assertion of getting something from the government. So I think women are getting increasingly pragmatic, rational and transactional as voters.
Thank you, thank you. Ashwani, I'd like to bring up a question actually that Badri posed, which is if there are different kinds of democracy, how does Indian democracy differ from the West?
Well, democracies all over the world are anchored in certain rights, rights that inhere in us by virtue of our humanity. Liberty, equality, freedom, justice, inclusion. These are not dispensations handed down to us through the constitutions. In fact, the constitutions encase what is inherent in us by virtue of our humanity. So I don't really think that essentially democracies across the world, constitutional democracies, rights-based democracies across the world differ in any material particulars. Of course, each country has its own lived experiences about democracies, about their pitfalls, about their strengths. My idea about Indian democracy is first and foremost that it is rooted in the aspirations of India's freedom movement. India is a country, I've always believed, born to freedom, anchored in freedom, and will live for freedom. Freedom in India is an unending frenzy, as one of my friends always used to say and has written extensively. And I think that has been demonstrated way back in our history, even in contemporary history from 1975 onwards. Whenever freedom is under assault, the people of India collectively react. However, I must also say that what I indicated earlier in my first intervention, the risk about populism leading to majoritarianism and majoritarianism prevailing over constitutionalism is the real risk. And that is what we need to address. For example, where does Indian democracy stand today in terms of the substantive content of democracy? I think we have achieved a lot since independence. The nation has made huge progress. But we cannot deny that even today, a very large part of the Indian people are denied the basic right to human dignity. My writings, my reflections, which are continued in my latest book, Guardians of the Republic, tell me that democracy without delivering human dignity is hollow. Like Allama Iqbal, famous poet of India and Pakistan, said about man, about individual, and I'll translate it. न तू ज़मीं के लिए है न आसमां के लिए, जहां है तेरे लिए, तू नहीं जहां के लिए. The state does not exist for the individual. The individual does not exist for the state. The state exists for the individual. And what is an individual without his dignity? Nothing. And that is why that takes us to the question of democratic leadership, which is of the essence. Democratic leadership has to be transformative leadership, which means it has to be leadership which is magnanimous enough to take everyone along and reflect the truly felt sensitivities of the people. And that, I think, is something which we need to reflect upon as far as our own experiences are concerned. Nishane raah dikhate the jo sitaron ko, the countries who showed the light even to the stars, निशाने राह दिखाते थे जो सितारों को, भटक रहे हैं किसी मर्द राहदां के लिए. They are in search for leadership. So all countries have their own histories, their own memories. Nations live through their memories. And in conclusion to your question, I would only like to say that I would like the qualitative distinction of my country's democracy to be judged by what it does to promote human dignity of the vast swaths of people who are still denied their basic right to humanity, their basic right to dignity.
So, Badri, does that exist anywhere? When you look around the world, do you see that kind of almost perfect democracy working? And where is it coming from?
No, I think I didn't find in any democracy of the world appear as a perfect democracy. Democracy on the one hand create hope, but after some time you find that there is a decay. So ups and downs always goes in the democratic state. But you know, democracy is an evolving process, and it creates aspirations. And for aspirations, you need a certain kinds of economic, social stability in the society for everyone. Many democracies are able to deliver that, and they are either delivering or evolving to deliver that. But your question which you raised earlier, that is about how Indian democracy is different from other democracy. Actually, the answer lies how Indian politics is different from other politics. Because Indian politics from the very beginning, even during freedom movement, it was not merely a state politics. It was politics for the society. Like Gandhi always weaved his politics with the society. So in India, the politics always linked with the society. And a state here is not that way very strong. Society always remained strong in India. Because in Indian society, we have a organic social leaders, opinion leaders, sant, the preachers, those who are intellectual the leaders of the society, and they regulate a state many times. You know, if you see the history of India, the state means a Raja always was regulated by a certain kind of agency, and that agency directly or indirectly, like Kabir, like Ravidas, like various bhakti saints, and before that various saints, they used to regulate the state through their own messages, directly or indirectly. So that tradition continued even in the post-independent India. Our politics and our this kind of opinion maker preachers, they always the influence state. So in India, society is already in the process of framing, forming, and evolving, and that society never allowed to become a state very authoritarian. And the way it happened in Pakistan, the way it happened in other South Asian countries. So India's success of democracy lies, in our opinion, social leaders and linking our politics with the society, especially opinion leaders, the preachers, the saints, the organic leaders. They play a very important role in regulating so constant revision of Indian democracy going on. And if you minutely observe, you can find at every level, you can find this kind of the revision. There is a story of success and unsuccess too in this process, but we should tell the society the story of success and not focus more on the unsuccess. Usually our methodology of understanding intellectual history is focusing more on unsuccess, not on success. India needs a success story. India is a growing, Indian democracy is a growing, Indian economy is growing, society is growing, but we don't have a story to support that growth. We are very critical. We put our critical, criticism against any development. So that's the thing which we need to tackle.
Yeah, yeah. So Manu, I wonder then if that familiarity with negotiation and compromise that perhaps comes up through the grassroots, through societal negotiations from the historical that we were just discussing, does that make people more tolerant of democracy's failures?
No, actually, I'll answer this question through an aspect of Indian democracy which is usually not discussed. And this is also one of the reasons why the poor don't kill us. Because there is a civil war going on between the poor. The greatest enemies of the poor are the poor itself. We can understand it through the idea of envy. We are led to believe that people who don't have envy people who have. In fact, India's famous philosopher Chanakya, who has my hairstyle, but nobody has read him, but everybody knows the synopsis. When Indians want to be jerks, they invoke Chanakya. But Chanakya said many other things, and he framed envy as something the lazy feel for people who are hardworking, and the immoral feel for the moral. And he even said that the prostitute envies the loyal woman, by whom he meant the married woman. But I think, though I like Chanakya, he's completely wrong. This is also the popular view of envy. You don't envy Mukesh Ambani unless you're a billionaire yourself. Most likely you envy your neighbor, your cousins, your peers. Envy is a thing between equals, and also Bengali women envy Bengali women more than others. Caste, people in the same caste envy the other the people in their own caste. So envy is a thing between equals, and there is another human emotion which works on the same lines, which is hatred. So I find that, for example, you take the migrant issue. What is that? Migrant issue is poor from outside undercutting the local poor. So there is a competition. And so in all aspects of society, the poor face competition from other poor, all the harassment. For example, the maids in my colony, they face the most harassment from the security guards, from the cops. So the poor face most of their problems from the other poor. So there is a lot of competition and rancor between the average Indians, the voting class. So that is one of the defining aspects of Indian politics, I feel, which usually is not discussed. And many times the Indian upper class comes across as some kind of a savior of the poor. Though theoretically they may believe that they have to hate the big people, but often the big people turn out to be the ambassadors of human goodness and service, while most of their social disenchantment is between themselves.
Thank you. Ruhi, do you think that when excluded groups, and by here I mean women or minorities, claim space, how does that change democratic resilience? Is there a fundamental shift?
Right. So I think there is, to begin with, there is often resistance if minority groups like women or minority religions or caste or any sort of vulnerable communities start asserting themselves through the democratic process. There is resentment, there is a bit of resistance, but the beauty of democracy, and I think which is why even if you're saying just 2 cheers, there are a couple of cheers going for democracy, is that it's a great leveler eventually. And the right to vote that every individual gets is sacrosanct and it's absolute, and if it's used well, it gives everybody the right to choose how they fathom their country, their state to function, right? It changes the democratic process if there is greater assertion from marginalized groups because their voices, for instance, come to the forefront. Their politics comes to the forefront. Their needs, their aspirations, their motivations come to the forefront. And in a democracy, any state, any political party, the political class is forced to respond. Is forced to negotiate with these voices, with these sections, because at the end of the day, you want their vote. You are nothing without their vote. Even if it's a purely transactional or a purely, strategic exercise, you're forced to do it because their vote matters. And I think somewhere down the line, it's very important to understand that this is where democracy across the world, in various parts of the world, is so important because it gives a voice and an equal space to all kinds of marginalized communities. And at some point, they start coming out of the margins. Now, how much, if you talk of gender, we've always talked of how there have been great men in history and how, XYZ was a great statesman and fathers of the nation. When do we talk about women? I think it's time that we start talking about what women really want. And what better way to do it than through democracy, than through the process of democratic elections and through the process of bringing women's voices to the forefront, which, as I said earlier, is the best part of democracy. It gives everybody that space. It may be delayed. It's not perfect. There may be a huge lag. As Ashwani ji pointed out, the human dignity is still denied, but eventually it's inbuilt in democracy, and at some point, the level playing field will come across, and which is why I think today we are talking about women, right? I mean, 30 years ago, people weren't even talking about women when we were discussing democracy. So things are changing.
Listen, in around 4 minutes, we're going to come to you, the audience, for questions. And before we do that, it would be a huge mistake not to just get a quick take from all of you on Donald Trump, on what's happening in America and how that's changing what we think of as democracy. Is the USA even a democracy anymore?
Well, I think the answer to that question is obvious. I'm nobody to comment on what American democracy today looks like, but it is quite clear that President Trump is not a Democrat. And if President Trump is not a Democrat, the question still arises, who is responsible for that situation? It is the vast mass of the American people who voted him not once but twice, knowing fully well his views. And who is to be blamed? Not Mr. Donald Trump, but the people who brought him to the office. And that is why, that takes me to my fundamental thesis, that democracy will survive and will acquire its resilience only in the informed assertion of the citizenry of those countries. And because populism thrives at the cost of principle, as it does in America, and has been so for the last 10 or 15 years, that is why the American democracy is in the state in which it is today. So until there is social assertion by the informed people who are able to enlist the support of the not so informed people in favor of principle that carries conviction with the people at large, democracies will remain fragile. American democracy is a classic example. The rise to power of President Trump is a classic example at some stage of the indifference of the people of various countries to the slow but sure depletion of the substantive content of democracy.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to ask for a very quick take on this. Yeah.
Actually, if Trump, the way Trump is behaving, can we say he is a democratic leader? And if he's a not democratic leader, India, American people need to rethink, is America will continue, is America is continuing like a democratic country? So America case, the way American leaders are behaving, especially Trump, I don't think if this is the democracy, no one would like this kind of democracy, because this democracy is not oppressive for their own people. Maybe that can create problem for entire world. So everywhere that kind of, and in any democratic system, I think this kind of politics should not continue. And politics should always be empowering others, not oppressing others. But one can say this is the state interest, because of their interest they are doing that. So then you don't claim the democratic leader of the world. You don't claim that you are the master of the democratic politics. You are the patron of democratic policy. They are claiming. In that way, Indian politics is entirely different. Indian politics democracy is entirely different. It always try to, as Ashwani said, it always try to interact with the society. Like you see our leader, Narendra Modi, he always propose his politics with the society, with the social issues. And so society, strengthening the society is the main cause, main indicator of democratic politics, which is not happening in America. American politics is going entirely in different way, and I think they should rethink about their opinion leaders, their intellectuals, those who always claim and those who criticize others. Look, in India, or in other countries, they are not doing in democratic way, not performing in democratic way. They should rethink whether their leaders, their politics are performing as a democratic way. If it is for a democratic way, we should rethink about the democracy and its frame and its format.
Thank you for that. I'm just going to ask literally for 2 sentences, because we do need to move on to the audience.
Okay, I feel that Trump has done something good for India, which is that if you've seen, the Indian upper class has started protesting on the streets for better air, better road, better garbage collection. My theory is that has happened because Indian upper class has figured out escaping India is not an option anymore. So might as well stay here and make India a better place. Then we get cheap house help and also good air.
Thank you.
You know, it's so hard to defend Mr. Donald Trump. I was thinking while all the panelists were speaking that since everybody is speaking against him, should I play the devil's advocate? But no, I have no point, no way that I can defend him. You know, one question that always lingers when you talk about the US and the leadership is, why has there not been a woman president so far? And I think it's a big blot on a country of that size and that sort of democracy. But I think Mr. Trump is a disaster beyond the question of gender. The problem with Mr. Trump isn't only that he's undemocratic in his way of thinking and functioning. I think he's very proudly undemocratic. He doesn't seem to want to be democratic. He doesn't want to take that feedback, and that's very dangerous in a leader. You know, you may develop autocratic tendencies, but when you believe that being autocratic is the best way and is the right way to rule not just your country but the world, that makes it really, really dangerous. And I think the United States of America has a lot to worry about if this is the direction it plans to take.
Thank you. Thank you. We are going to take some audience questions now. Please just keep it to one clear question, no statements. Understand that I'm not shutting down your freedom of speech. We simply have no time for long statements. And if you'd say which member of the panel your question is directed to. And there's a mic out there, so if you just want to grab the first person there.
My question is actually to the entire panel. What do you think is the responsibility of the citizens in a democratic system?
The responsibility of the citizen, it's to vote. You have to go and vote, exercise your right to vote. Don't look at it as a box that has to be ticked. It's an instrument of assertion. It's not just your duty, it's the way that you would determine how your country is run. So please go and vote, use that vote very sensibly, very cautiously, but go and vote.
Yeah, you can't complain unless you've had a part in the process, right? Let's take our next question.
Godwin, I just want to add to this because that is key. The right to vote is fine. The exercise of the right to vote is fine. But what is it that makes you to decide to vote one way or the other. That's the key. Please take into consideration when you vote the fundamental principles of the Republic. Which is the party, which is the leader, which is the candidate that gels with your idea of the fundamentals of our Republic. That's the key issue.
My
No,
response to your question is, first of all, everyone should struggle to become a full citizen, because in various parts of the world, the migrants, various refugees, they are various kinds of community. They have not yet acquired the full citizenship. Full citizens in real sense, not in terms of card or in terms of dignity and respect and equal share in the society resources. So first of all, every society has to acquire its own full citizenship, and for that they have to struggle.
I have a confession. I have never voted. And it's not very nice. And also, I find it very irritating when people say that, oh, you've not voted, you're an idiot, and you can't expect anything if you have not voted. Look, I don't share the majority views. There is nothing that I can vote for in this country and get, because the majority has a completely different view from me. And also, this idea that voting is a moral act is one of the biggest bull that the elite have spread. Voting is not a moral act. You know, voting is about a lot of negatives. And I mean, if there is anybody here who's feeling bad that they have not voted, I know you wouldn't want to admit it. I want to tell you that I kind of understand.
Next question, and if we could please just direct it to one member of the panel. We don't have time for multiple answers. Yeah.
I'm going to talk about electoral systems. I mean, there are many forms of democracy, and therefore the basis of democracy is measuring those, you know, the representation.
What is the question?
The question is, isn't our system, the first past the post measure of voting, what leads to majoritarianism? And that would be to Ashwani Kumar.
There's an ongoing debate about that, but for the moment, that is the system we have given unto ourselves, and that system has worked pretty well all these years. But I will not be the one to say that we don't need to have a relook at the system. The real challenge is to ensure that the popular will, which is enlisted through the electoral process, truly reflects and is representative of the felt sensitivities of the nation as a whole at a given point of time. And I'd like to make one more point, that when you vote in elections, as Ruhi was saying, and to some extent I agree with her, but not entirely, voting and electoral democracy cannot be mere transactional exercises. They just cannot be. You have to vote for principles. You don't have to vote for benefits all the time.
Thank you. And we'll have one last audience question, please. I see there's a gentleman here in the front.
My question is for Ruhi. It's okay, I suppose, generally to throw stones at other democracies and how it sort of functions, as we've seen with the United States and the issues that it's had, but isn't Modi killing Indian democracy?
Oh, absolutely. But you know, the issue is that I think President Trump makes Prime Minister Modi look very democratic. So I think it's a question of relativity. But no, not to be facetious. There is a problem with the current dispensation about how the direction it takes, the kind of autocratic tendencies, the kind of policies it practices, and most importantly with its Hindutva majoritarian politics. And I think when you try and marginalize a certain community, even if it's the minority, for electoral reasons, then you are treading down a very, very dangerous path. So no way is my critique of President Trump any sort of endorsement of Prime Minister Modi either.
I wonder if Manu, we could, as a non-voter, if you could just give us your take.
Yeah, see, basically, how do you improve things if you're not a voter? Okay, I have an idea and I want support. I plan to start a movement where the Indian upper middle class stops buying expensive stuff for 6 months. don't buy flats, don't buy TVs, don't buy cars for 6 months as a form of protest because we don't have parks, we don't have roads, we don't have clean air. This is the only meaningful way in which we can get what we want. Otherwise, don't forget, politics is the revenge of the poor. This is the way there is a compensation for social inequality. So that is my alternative for voting.
What would you say to that?
Yeah, just I will request to everyone that please come out from the stereotypical narratives which has been evolved by a certain kind of intellectual factory, no, and please rethink while using these terms, this majoritarianism. I am not taking name that majoritarianism. India is a country which can't be majoritarian. Either it's democracy in this democracy or before democracy, means the pre-modern society. India always remained a very inclusive, interactive society, inclusive society, interactive society, and it will remain. We trust on Indian ethos and values.
Well, you wouldn't say that if you're a Muslim or a Christian.
Actually, you wouldn't say that even if you were a woman or a Dalit.
Ashwani, the voice of reason.
Well, you know, democracy is about inclusion. The moment any section of the society feels excluded from the democratic process, the moment we start othering people, the moment we start assuming a superiority over others, intellectual, cultural, social, political, economic, that spells the death knell of democracy. We all know this. This is nothing new. What I'm saying is known to each one of us here. The problem is that while we keep mulling over these, we do not assert these principles either at the polling booth when we are making our choice or in the larger conversations in the public spaces. Democratic resilience is about the ability to express yourself without fear. And I must say today, and I'm not attributing it to any dispensation, I'm not attributing it to any individual, I'm saying it as a matter of principle. It has happened in the past, but there is a sense of pervasive fear that enables us that disables us from expressing our views freely, and that is why I fear for my democracy.
Thank you very much indeed. And thank you to all of you for being here. I'm just going to hand back to Kamal.